Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CADD's weekly Wednesday webinar. We are continuing this week with the FDOT Traffic Plan series. We are taking a look at Chapter 11, which is Quantities and Reports. And today we're going to take a look at the tools that we use to generate and document our quantities in the traffic plans. Tools that we will be looking at is D&C Manager and specifically the compute mode. We'll take a look at Quantity Manager as well as Link Data Manager, which we will be using to automate the creation of the tabulation of quantity sheets. I want to make a note at this point. The documentation, which is a handout for the webinar, it does not cover the whole transport options. We have that documented a couple places. There's a webinar out there that takes you from A to Z as far as the CAD to designer interface workflows, and it's also documented in the FDOT Automated Quantities Training Manual. Even though you're not doing roadway quantities, you would still be able to follow through with that chapter and be able, with the traffic plans and what you have today, be able to follow through with that chapter and be able to get all the information that you need in order to get your quantities uploaded into designer interface. Okay. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into MicroStation and start looking at what we have for generating quantities. I have opened up the clip SP01. So this is the file that I have for my clipboarders. Okay. I've referenced in my DSGN SP file so that I have all of my items and elements that I need to calculate in the reference to this design file. D&C Manager has the ability to calculate our quantities, one, while they're in a reference file, but most importantly for our automation purposes, I can go through and calculate with D&C using a sheet range. And the sheet range is using my clipboarders that are set up in here. So as we go along, we put all of our quantities, we draw everything in the D&C Manager. It's important that we use the D&C Manager so that when we go to calculate, everything is recognized by the tool. Anything that is using that D&C database in the background is tagging it so that D&C Manager will recognize it for quantities. So when I say anything that is using in the background, I'm talking about the draw cell tools, so draw cell by feature and draw cell group by feature. Also the civil features, if you're drawing in traffic separators or curb and gutter or whatever you may be in your design, okay, so in this case it could also be any of this. If I'm drawing in some of my line work for any of my markings, if I were to use, because we have features set up for all of our pavement markings, if I were to go in and I was working in signals and I wanted to draw some conduit, I can use the civil tools to do that. Civil tools, when we talked about it, I mean, it's an option that is out there, but when I use those civil features, it's also tagging the D&C information back to these elements so that when we go to quantify everything, it's there. Okay, so let's go in and let's take a look at the D&C Manager. I'm going to open it up from the quantities, so tasks, the FDOT Plans Development task menu, and then under quantities, it's the first icon here. So when I go into the D&C, close this up, I have a couple of different options when I'm talking about computing quantities. First thing I want to do is get the D&C into what they call the compute mode, and that's by clicking on the little calculator here. It brings up the plan quantity computation, and whatever I have highlighted in the top up here, because I now have two windows basically to the dialog box. Whatever item or category that I highlight, I can then go in and calculate it. That's one option. I can select a single category, or I can go in and select a single item and be able to calculate that. Or there may be times when I want to go in and I want to create what they call a collection set. Collection set is real easy to do. Anything pretty much, if I right click, it's going to give me this option at the top to add to collection. So for exercise 11.1, we're going to go through the steps of using D&C Manager in order to calculate the quantities that I need for my signing and pavement markings. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a collection set. So, and I want to include all of the thermoplastic, so I'm going to tell it to add to collection. And the second thing that I'm going to add in here is my island nose paint. Island nose paint is paint. There is no thermo that goes with it. So I don't have a thermoplastic item that is going to calculate that quantity of paint for me. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to add it to my collection. And then I'm going to go up to the top above the paint to the pavement markers. And we have two items in here. 706.3, which is for the RPMs. And this particular item is just going to calculate all the RPMs that I have, and it lumps them all together. I also have an RPM quantity, and this one, it will give me a breakdown on the screen. In my results, it'll give me a breakdown of how many white reds, how many yellows, etc. that I have. So it just depends on which district you're working for, how you want this to show up. I'm just going to go ahead and just double click when I'm in the compute mode. By double clicking on an item, it will throw it down here into my collection set. So I'll double click that and notice it put it in here. Once I have my collection set, I can go in, and at that point I'm ready to take a look at quantifying those items. First thing I want to do is make sure that I have my job number selected. I want a chain. I'm going to select that chain, and it's going to be down my centerline construction. I'm going to take a look at my extents. I have a lot of different options in here, and I have my active design file. So everything that's in my design file, it goes and looks at in order to search for it. I can tell it I want everything in my view. I can tell it I want to use a fence, which means I've got to place a fence. I can use boundary elements, which you might want to be tempted to say, okay, well, this is a boundary element, all of my clip borders. Okay, but it's any shape that I have that's in the file, I can use that in order to quantify a quantity. I can use station ranges. I can use a sheet range, and this is the option that we want. In order for a sheet range to work, I have to have the sheets or the clip borders in my active design. Okay, so I can't be in my DSGNSP file and go in and attach the clip borders and have this work. Okay, it doesn't work that way. You have to be in the clip file with the clip borders in order for it to work. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the last two. They're kind of self-explanatory really, but we have selection sets. So I can create a selection set of elements and then quantify those, or I could create a selection set of some boundary elements and use, that way I'm just saying, okay, I just want this intersection and that intersection, and what is my quantity for that? I can use that as an option as well, but we're going to go ahead and go through the sheet range. Because we are talking about traffic plans, all of these components use a tabulation of quantities sheet, and those are set up so that we're quantifying everything per sheet. So I need to make sure that I use this clip option. If I were to use inside, that means that the elements that it calculates have to be completely inside of the clip border, otherwise it will not calculate it. So if it overlaps and it goes into the next clip border or onto the next sheet, then I don't get that calculation for that element at all. I can use overlap, but then I get the entire element. So if I've got 50 feet going over into the next sheet, I get that extra quantity on my sheet where it doesn't belong. So I want to make sure I set this to clip. And then I want to click on this little button at the end, and it's identify a plan sheet clip border. When I click on it, I want to grab this clip border. Now it has to be a clip border that was generated through GeoPack because it has the information associated with what alignment did I use, what's the scale of these sheets, how many sheets were in there. It picks all of that information up off these clip borders. And if I didn't pick a chain, this would have set that chain for me to whatever chain was used to create those clip borders. So start with the sheet is 1, and it always puts this as 1 and 1. So the end sheet, I want to go in here and scroll down until I get to the bottom. So that's going to be 4 in this case. I can toggle on to highlight during computation. This is something that I definitely recommend that you do. And then compute quantities. All right. Before I do that, though, I've set that up. I skipped a step. Apologize for that. There's also in this exercise is, and this is a really good thing to do, is to go into the display option and go into highlight. So whatever I have in my collection set, it's highlighting everything in this collection set that I have. During this step, I would recommend that, oh, I didn't want that, you go in and turn off like the design, things that is not quantity related, and go in there and just to make it easier to view. Is there anything that got missed? Pretty much everything is highlighted. That means anything that's highlighted is what it's going to calculate. Okay. All right, so now I can go back and I'm going to turn this off, and then I'm going to go into the compute mode. Again, it has all my settings still there, and I'm going to hit compute quantities. Once it's calculated everything, it will highlight everything that it has calculated. So all these elements that are now highlighted, and you can see where it has used this border to clip these different elements so that I'm only calculating out to the border in order to get those numbers. Double check everything. Looks like it's calculated everything. And then take a look at your computation results. Computation results, there's a bunch in here. Let me open that up some. So you can see that it's gotten my thermoplastic, it's gotten my RPMs, it's gotten the paint that goes along with my thermoplastic. It's all been calculated in here for me. If there's anything in here that I may not want, an example would be if you were to take the pavement markings. I'm going to take a slight detour over here. If you calculate by just pavement markings, we've got a few items in here, and the biggest one that I'm aware of is these RPMs. We have 2 different items in here to calculate our RPMs for us. If I use either the pavement markers as a category or I use the pavement markings as a category, I would have gotten duplicate entries in here, or I would have gotten too many. That's why I've put in this category, and it's really, there's nothing in it, and it's just a reminder for you guys that says calculate by material. That way you're, hopefully it triggers that you'll be aware that whenever you calculate these things, sometimes you're going to wind up with extra information in here. If that happens, I can tell it, like my RPMs, I don't want to export this over to Quantity Manager, and I can untoggle that. So if that happens, easy fix, just tell it not to export. I'll toggle that back on. After double checking and making sure that all of this looks good, you want to look at the bottom of this dialog. Export format, we're going to use the DBMS option. DBMS option is the option that we want to use in order to take our quantities and create that MDB file that we need for Quantity Manager. Other options that I have in here, the comp book, the item report, item table, the CSV file, table, all of these options create either a CSV file, a text file. They're good for going in and simply having as like a reference, double checking things. I know when I did design and I was doing pavement markings, I would use some of these options to create that file just to give me something to double check what I've got going on. So that is an option, is to use that. I could also go in and when I calculate all this, what you're going to find is that things like, let me see if I can find them, my arrows. It didn't break my arrows out for me. I've got 8 arrows. And I think this is another one that may be a duplicate. It is. So I want to turn this one off. All right. I also have in here of all of these symbols broken out one by one inside of here. So I've got merge symbols. I've got my arrows have been broken out left and right. So I know how many there are, but when this gets to Quantity Manager, it's going to be lumped up together. Okay, so creating one of these other options to get just your arrows or just your 1030 skip, those things that combine together will help you be able to get the worksheet straightened out and set up the way that you need to deliver it in the end. Okay, so we have the DBMS option. You want to give it a name. I recommend just using the project name. In this case, I'm going to put an SP behind it for signing and pavement markings, or SPM. And then I want to set this to create. The first time that you do it, you always want to create. I have an option down here for the run. This is just information that would be pulled over into Quantity Manager. This is optional. Okay. For my groupings, I want to make sure that I've got this grouping set correctly. For the process and the workflow where I take these quantities later and I could take them and use them to import the quantities into Designer Interface, that has to match and be correct. Signing and pavement markings is 0300. Okay, once I have this all set up the way I need it, I just click export, and it's going to export those quantities out for me. Once I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and click and close this box. I want to go in, and the last part of this exercise is to get all of my signs. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to clear my collection, and then I'm going to go up to signing, and I'm going to just highlight it and tell it to compute quantities. I don't need to change anything else anywhere. I just need to get the other category. Tell it to compute. I now have my sign pay items. And I'm going to come down here, and instead of create, I want to change this to append, and then tell it to export. All right, down here at the very bottom left, you'll see it will tell you when it exports these out, it tells you that the export has been completed, and it tells you what file it's created. Okay. Okay, so that's pretty much all it was for exercise 11.1. And I'll go ahead and answer a couple of questions real quick before I move on to Quantity Manager. Are the clip borders referenced or live in the file? Clip borders are live. Can the borders be referenced to do the same task? No, they cannot. What happens if a pavement arrow or message is right on the sheet clip line? It's going to use the origin. Those are cells, and they're calculated by each. So cell origin is, and the likelihood that it is right smack on one of these border lines is very, very, very rare. It may be something that when you're you create your clipboarders is something to kind of take a look at and adjust if necessary. But whichever border has the origin for these cells is the one that it's going to pick up in order to place. It will not calculate it twice, even though you see part of the arrow in one clipboarder and part of it in the other. At this point, let's go ahead and let's move on to Quantity Manager. I just want to give you guys a brief tour of Quantity Manager. That's pretty much what's in that chapter. It's not going to be very often that when you're using the traffic plans that you're actually needing to get into Quantity Manager. We automate the creation of your tab sheets using LDM, so really there's no need to get into Quantity Manager very often. So I can get to Quantity Manager by going to Geopack, Road, and then Quantity Manager. I can also get to it from my Quantities task menu by clicking on the little green button. And sometimes this is pretty fast, sometimes it takes it a minute or two. Be patient. All right, so Quantity Manager, what is this tool? It is basically it's developed by Geopack, so it's a Geopack tool. It's standalone, so it's not within MicroStation, although you have to get into MicroStation in order to open it. It is a tool that we use to store, organize, manipulate our quantities for a project. I can go to Project Open, or I can use this little icon here, Open Project. I want to navigate out, make sure that I get to the correct MDB file. Projects, and go to Signing. So there's that MDB that we just created. I'm going to open it. And once I do that, I don't have a username and password, and we do not recommend that you put a username and password on these things. If you leave your company, you're not there, you get sick, something happens, no one else will be able to get into this database without that information. So we do not recommend that you do that. So leave those blank and hit Connect. And it opens up all the items. We have in here, we have menus. The menu in here, these are pretty basic. Import, export, open, new, those kinds of things. There's some preferences, properties for your project. Again, this is covered in detail in the Automated Quantities Manual, so I recommend that you guys go to that to get that information. Edit, selecting, unselecting. Our transport groupings. This is important to know about. The transport groupings are there. I can see what groupings that I have. If you ever see design estimate in here, you know you're going to have a problem with the import process. Again, this is covered in the other manual. And how would I fix that is covered in the other manual. Okay. So I have some menu options, and I have some icons here. If I make changes to this database and it's still open within MicroStation, I can click this refresh button and it'll refresh and get the latest information. I can look at how it's tiled. I can change my view so that I have my items. So I can look at pay items, I can look at quantities. Okay. This is the classic view that has the 3 panes in it. I have my pay item view, which is over here. It's on the left. It has 2 tabs. I can look at it as a tree. It looks a lot like what you have in D&C Manager, which I can open and close, you know, to get to wherever I need to go. I can also go to this pay item table, and it's a table, and it has all of my pay items in it. Most of the time, I think I use the tree view. I can use icons here to expand the entire tree so it opens everything up. All of my quantities are showing up in here. Or I can close the whole thing down. Okay, let me open that back up. And I don't think I hardly ever use these, but this basically allows me to show and hide different information tables, columns. Okay, let's go ahead and look at our views. I've got the, like I said, we've got the pay item pane over here. If I select one of these items, and it doesn't matter which one here, any of the pay items, they have the little blue calculators. Okay, when I select one, it's going to give me a list in the top right pane, and this is your quantity pane. This has all the different quantities that are associated with that pay item. If I select one of the quantities, it's going to populate this bottom right pane, and this is my element pane. Inside of here, I have different options. We don't use the funding. Okay, so the payer participation, the funding participation, and the funding rules, those don't apply to us. The two that you want to be concerned with are element and ad hoc attributes. My elements, it gives me the information here for going in, and I can see what my element ID is, what type of element that it is, the length. Just gives us some extra information. Okay. I can also go to ad hoc attributes, and under ad hoc attributes, any ad hoc that was associated with it in MicroStation comes across, and this is where you will find that information. So when I calculated this thermoplastic for this, the 6-inch, or is that the 8-inch? 8-inch white, it also calculated for me the paint quantity that I needed for my 8-inch white. Okay. I also have, if I look at, open this up some, there are a lot of columns in Quantity Manager. I can right-click on the top row here, this header row, and get this quantity table dialog where I can go in and start turning these things off if I need to. I don't need the remarks. I don't need that. I don't need that. I can look at, let's see, I probably don't need, I'll leave it there. But I got to what I wanted. Okay, I wanted to go in here and show you that in here, it has that run name that we placed in here. It's in here, the signing and payment marking. So whatever run name that you give it, if once you get into Quantity Manager, if you wanted to sort and look at that information just for a specific run that you've created, you can do that. And that's one of the advantages of using the run name in D&C when you're calculating, because that information does come across. The other thing is this sheet, the boundary. So it tells me that all of these items here, let me highlight them all. And I highlighted them just using the keyboard, click Shift, select one, then select the other. But it tells me that all of these elements right here, which are part of this quantity, were on sheet 1. I have one that's on sheet 2. I have all of these that are on sheet 3, and I only have one that was on sheet 4. Okay. LDM, when it creates our tab sheets, it's coming in here and it's finding the sheet information, and that's how it knows it needs to pull that across in order to create our tab sheet. Okay, so it knows which column it needs to go in based on this boundary. I also have more information like, you know, the station, begin, end, etc. But like I said, there's a lot of information here, but I wanted to point out this boundary. So what does that tell me if I have that boundary? Do you think I can go in here and simply add a quantity and it get pulled into my tab sheet? Well, it depends on how you add a quantity. Okay, this isn't in the chapter, but I'm going to go ahead and just show you this real quick. If I needed to insert a quantity for some reason, and honestly, it's probably not something that I would even really recommend, but there's always that one situation that I'm just not thinking of when I say things like that. But I can come in here when I create a quantity. I need to make sure that when I add it to the database, I break it down by sheets and that I tell it it is a sheet boundary, and then I give it the sheet number. Okay, it's already got that information here and it'll populate these drop downs. All right, so make sure that when you add quantities, you pay attention to this. Otherwise, when you create your tab sheets with LDM, that information won't get pulled across into your worksheets. All right, so let me close that. Pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about as far as Quantity Manager. It's really just an overview, because with traffic plans, typically we just don't have to go into this dialog box very often. Oh, one other thing. It's probably easier with this workflow to just simply overwrite the entire database, create a new one. If you've got to go in and say they change a turn lane on you at the last minute, you can come in here and you'd have to find the 6 cents white, whatever items, maybe you need some extra arrows, whatever it is. If you're going to up the database and you're going to do it pay item by pay item and not all of your quantities at once, then what you need to do is find that pay item and delete it from this database. Okay, so I would need to come in here and delete it, go back into MicroStation, and then append just that pay item back into this database. Hopefully that made sense. That's also covered in the automated quantities as well. If I was doing signing and payment marking plans, I would simply just redo everything. All right, so now I'm going to close Quantity Manager. And the third section of this chapter is focused on Link Data Manager, or LDM. And I'd like to give you guys some basics with LDM. First off, how do I even access it? And what does it do? Okay. I can get to LDM by going to Actions, Link Data Manager. I can also get to by going to Tasks, FDOT Plans Development, and then clicking on the Open Link Data Manager icon here that's under Quantities. Okay. LDM is a tool that was developed back with the FDOT 2010 software that is used to link spreadsheets, Excel files, Word documents, text files. I can even get CSV files, link them into my MicroStation DGN files, okay? And it uses the formatting in our source files, especially Excel and Word. It uses that formatting, so it's grabbing fonts, it's grabbing text sizes, things like that, and it is bringing that information in order to build our tables, to place our text in that link in our MicroStation file. How do I create a link? Really easy. Open up the tool. First icon here is to create a new link. I have options to create new from template, create new from quantities. We're going to look at the create new from quantities. On our Create New from Quantities, I have the options for selecting that MDB or Quantity Manager database that we just created. I can take the text and make it all caps, and most of our plans we use all caps. So I would recommend turning that on. Me personally, I like all caps. And it's as simple as grabbing an MDB file, telling it I want to use the uppercase, and then telling I want tabulation of quantities. And then just telling it OK. And it's going to create that for me, and it'll create as many worksheets as I need in order to document however many sheets that I have in my plans. Okay, I'm going to hit cancel on all of this because I'm not in the right file. I'll just leave LDM over here. In order to place, I need to be in the tabulation of quantities sheet file. So I want to go to Actions, Create Files, and make sure that my project is set correctly. I'm in the SS4 workspace. I have the roadway control file, and I want to go down here to Signing and Pavement Markings and go down to Tabulation of Quantity Sheets. The file that I need is the tab QSP01. I'm going to create that file. Tells me that it created it successfully. And then I want to open that file. Okay. Pay attention to your set update plot scale. You can just click OK, but realize that it's at a scale of 50. You can also tell it you want a scale of 1. I'm just going to tell it OK, but I need to remember this is at a scale of 50. Okay, plot scale is what we need for Sheet Navigator to put our digital signature note along the edge of the border. Okay, and it's important that our sheet matches what we have out there for that plot scale so the Sheet Navigator functions correctly. All right, so once I have all that done, I can just tell it OK, and it'll close it, and we're done. So now I'm in the right file. Let's go back over here and let's go through that process again. I create link, create new from quantities. I want to navigate out, and it knows what directory I'm in. Okay, so I want to make sure I grab the correct MDB file, tell it to open. I'm going to toggle on to force the text, and I'm going to grab tabulation of quantities. It is going to ask me to save this file. Okay, so I want to make sure it's in my working directory. It's going to put me in that same working directory that I'm in. Okay, this is the name of the file, and going through this chapter, I realized that I need to create other files, and I will do that so that we have one just for signing of pavement marking, and then another one that will be for, you can use for any other discipline besides signing and pavement markings. But I'm going to save that file. And the reason is that signing and pavement markings has a note that is part of the template that you don't need on any of the other disciplines. And so when you create those, you have to go in and delete that note off the bottom. All right, so for description, this is optional. You can put in whatever you want. I'm going to toggle on this place title block, and everything in here is going to be fine. It's going to be in the roadway cell library using the SH plan because I just need the sheet border. That's all I want. Everything else that goes in that sheet is going to be brought in and placed from that Excel file that I just created. I need to make sure that I take my cell offset and set that to 0. The graphic settings is fine. Update graphics on file open is good. What I want to, and the reason I wanted to make sure that I mentioned to pay attention, this is using a plot scale of 50, so I need to make sure I use my drawing scale. Okay. And whether you've gone back and checked to make sure that drawing scale is set or not, it's okay. It may come in too small, but we can fix that. All right, so I'm going to tell it to use the drawing scale, and I'm going to tell it okay. It's going to do its thing for a second. And then you'll see when it's done, it has created for us a tab sheet. And it's on my cursor, and I just click anywhere in the screen, and it places it. Okay. The data in here, so the actual table information on this sheet is the link. My border is not. Okay. Let me double check back here, and I want to go to settings, and I want to go to my drawing scale and verify. And no, it was at a 1:1, so this is 1:50. Okay, so when I fix that, and I come over here and I tell it update now, it's going to update my table or my link. It's not going to update my sheet. I'll have to scale the sheet. That's huge. Ta-da. All right, so I can quickly scale this. So lesson learned on this one is if you're going to use the 50 scale instead of a scale of 1, go in and double check your drawing scale first. All right, so I want to scale that to 50. And I'm just going to scale it. And then I'm going to move it. The cell origin for this table is the corner up here. So if I go to key point, if I grab this, oh, I don't want to scale, I want to move. So if I grab this top corner and I use the origin for the table, it's going to put it in the correct location. All right, and notice that I do have the note down here for the 71090 Payitem. All right, I can close LDM at this point or leave it open, it doesn't matter. But what I wanted to do is I'm kind of moving this stuff around so that you can see the actual data that got brought in. Notice that my RPMs and all of my paint, it all has Payitems in here. Well, I need an asterisk in that column. You can look at chapter, I think it's 23, in the PPM volume 2, and it tells you you've got to have this note and that I have to put an asterisk in here for these. Well, how do I do that? I don't want to do that in MicroStation. I want to tell you that straight up. Don't do it here. What I want to do is go into Link Data Manager, right click and tell it open source. Okay, so here's all of my data. With these files, I will, another word of caution, with these files, make sure that you don't, in Excel, modify your column widths. When you do, these will not fit within the border like it's supposed to. Okay, I'm moving this off the screen for the time being so we can zoom in, and I want to look at Excel. So I will go in and I'm going to put in an asterisk and overwrite that Payitem number. Quick, easy way for me to overwrite this is just to grab this little green square that's at the bottom of this cell. I want to grab it and drag it down. And I'm going to take it down to the 610 yellow dotted lines. I don't want to overwrite this Payitem for the island nose paint. The reason that I don't want to do that is because my island nose paint, it's not part of my thermoplastic. Okay, so that one needs to stay. They can paint that and it's not going to have any effect on the asphalt. All right. That's enough to fix it for half of the state. So I can go in at this point. I need to make sure that I save my Excel file. Minimize that. Go back into MicroStation. In LDM, I want to right click and tell it to update now. And it takes it a second. But notice now I have got asterisks in this column. If you don't like it being left justified like the rest of the Payitem numbers, you can come in here in Excel and put these so that they're centered. Personal preference, but that would be done in Excel, and you can do that. One more thing as far as LDM goes, I do want to mention about, if you'll notice here, that list is not nearly as long as what it was before. Part of the reason for that is if you look for our messages, I've only got one message. It's got the right quantity in here, okay, but it does not have everything broken out. I don't know how many left, right, merge, etc. I think as far as my messages, I've got merge and only. My arrows are the same way. Okay, this is not broken out. If I want to do that, I can do that. Grab the formatting. Just remember, if I say I've got, 4 different arrows, I can right click, copy, go to my arrows, right click, and insert those copied cells. If I do that, I get all the formatting with it. Okay, and it does place it above. So you want to grab the one underneath it. Just make sure that you go back down here at the bottom, and whatever you've copied and pasted or inserted, make sure you go back and delete it, because otherwise you're adding in columns and it's going to throw it off and you'll be in the title block of the border. So I'm actually going to just do this another way. I'm going to delete to here and delete to here. And then I'm going to go in here and I would need to type this. I'm going to copy, paste, paste. My symbols, I have merge, and double clicking in the cell gets me into that cell. I'm going to type in only. Okay. And at that point, then I can go in and start modifying this. Make these each. I should have copied. There we go. And then I can start breaking these down. So instead of 5, whatever I had in my design, and that's where those other text files that I mentioned creating could come in handy, because if I calculate with D&C the way that I have modified with the last release, modified all of the descriptions, D&C Manager will always give you a breakdown of how many left turns, how many right turns, how many merge messages, how many only messages, etc., so that I can break it down quicker per sheet that's in here. Let me save that. I can come back over here into MicroStation, update it. And I'd want to do the same thing up here. The other one last tip when it comes to Excel is that in this case I only had 4 sheets. Maybe you've got 40. Well, if I've got 40 sheets, then I have got a whole lot of worksheets in here. I'll have more than one. I can take and use the shift to grab sheet 1. You hold down the shift and select the last one. When I'm making changes to multiple sheets, but it's the same exact change, I can group all those sheets together and make them all at one time. So when I come in here, whenever I copied and move these up here. I could do a cut and insert cut cells as well. When I do that, I'm doing it to all, say, 10 worksheets at one time. Just make sure that when you get done making those type of edits, before you start coming in here and making the changes to the individual cells to break out your quantities, make sure you ungroup the sheets, because otherwise you'll be making that same exact change to every single one of those worksheets, and that's going to really, you might as well just start over if you make too many of those before you realize you didn't ungroup. So it's really, it's a good tool, just be careful with it. All right, I think I've got one question sitting over here. This is a known issue. I have clearly 1,400 feet of 1030 skip on each sheet, double panel of 700 feet per feet plan view, but using clip method, it computes 1,384 on one page and then 1,426 on the next page. Why? Which should I label in my quantity tab? 0.62 gross miles and the next 0.27 gross miles, or should I modify it to say 0.265 gross miles for each sheet? This is a known issue with the D&C Manager and the way that it calculates the skip markings. It's not just, 1030 is the one that we see the most because it goes across multiple sheets, but it's not the only one. Basically, what's happening is that we place it using the pavement marking tools, and it's placing just the skip. Okay, so I've got a 10-foot line segment and then nothing until it gets to the next 10-foot line segment. When D&C Manager calculates that, it is giving me 10-foot, it has a formula in there and it says, okay, for every 10 feet, I got my element length, and I'm multiplying that element length times, no, it's adding for every 10, it's taking the total length it gets, so say it's 300, and it's dividing it by 10 so that it knows how many 10-foot segments I have, and then adding 30 feet for every 10-foot that I have. So depending on how those 10-foot segments are falling on your clip borders, so if I have a clip border that goes through, I don't know why it keeps doing that to me. If I have a clip border that runs through one of those segments of paint, it's going to have an effect on that, and that's why you're getting two different answers, even though it looks like it's the same. And it should be the same. Some reviewers, I mean, if it's a small project, I wouldn't worry about it. Just let D&C do whatever it wants to do. If it's a really big project, say I've got 17 miles, that can make a difference in the quantity, a significant difference. And you may want to go back in, figure out 700 feet if it's a 0.265, and replace that value throughout. If you do that, however, remember that your quantities in Quantity Manager are not going to match what's on this tab sheet. Okay, I know that in some districts they tell them to go in and make sure that that's not using what D&C gave you. District 3, I know they've come to me with that comment, and they go in and they modify what's going on. Like I said, if you do that, just make sure that you realize that that grand total that you're going to get by doing that is not going to match what's in Quantity Manager. So when you import that into Designer Interface, you need to make sure that you modify that as well to match. Honestly, it should not, in most of our projects, you should not see a significant difference between the two. Sometimes you will, but most of the time you should not. And I've talked to construction, they're not, at least central office construction, and they say that they're aware of it, but it's not like a huge concern. That's, I guess, because it's not that high dollar, especially paint. It's just not high dollar. And as long as you're within that 5%, $5,000, then you're okay. All right, well, that is all of the questions that I have. Hopefully I answered that well enough. Reminder, it is after October 7th, so our websites have changed. We're now using the FDOT.gov. Most of your links should be fine, even if it's a saved link, but you'll want to change it in the next short months, because for the time being they are redirecting. So most of your links should still work. If not, you want to go back and find those links again. If you guys have any questions, please let us know. You can contact us at the CAD.support@dot.state.fl.us. This is now changed. This should now be f.gov/CAD. All right, you guys have a fantastic day, fantastic rest of your week, and we will see you again next week. Next week's topic is Sheet Navigator.